Welcome to the Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services will begin the presentation at 6:05.
Before we begin, I just wanted to make sure this meeting is going to be recorded.
Yes, Shannon, this meeting will be recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this evening's Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services is about to begin the presentation. The presentation will be followed immediately by a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and opening the Q&A window. During the Q&A session, I will direct each question to the appropriate party for a verbal response. Kyle, feel free to begin when you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. Tonight, I'll be talking over a stormwater rate study that we've conducted for the City of Fort Lauderdale and the results of that study. And any rate study is a series of connected investigations. And so here are the core elements of the study that we've conducted for the city. And I'll be talking about each of the high-level findings from these compartments as we go through the presentation. The first being the revenue requirements. And this is simply put an analysis that is concerned with understanding how much it costs to run the stormwater operations in the City of Fort Lauderdale, including operations, maintenance, capital investments, and in projecting out those cost requirements for the next 10 years. Next, we'll look into the cost allocation, which is looking at parcels and understanding how they benefit from the stormwater services provided by the city. Then next, we'll go into the fee structure. Where does the rubber meet the road, and how do we design and the elements that go into creating an equitable, sustainable fee structure for the city. And then finally, we'll talk about the method of billing or collection. How do we actually collect the revenue from parcels or customers on the system? And so the first one I'll jump right into is the revenue requirement. And in order to conduct this component of the analysis, gathered a lot of financial data from the city. And so there's several segments that went into this. The first were the operations and maintenance expenditures. It's about $11.5 million on an annualized basis in the current year. That's currently funded by rates. The next component was the renewal and replacement capital projects. And so these are cash funded projects throughout the city. It's about $4 million a year. And the city currently has funding with the current rates in place to fund this on an annual basis. And then the final element concerns a master plan that the city has conducted, which looked at the entire city and prioritized a number of neighborhoods and projects to be completed within the city that will bring those areas, their stormwater level of service up. And so here you can see there's $200 million associated with 7 neighborhoods that have been prioritized as part of that effort and that were included in the analysis. That $200 million is currently unfunded as it concerns the rates in the current fiscal year. And the goal of this analysis really fundamentally is to understand how to provide enough revenues for the utility that it's sustainable on a go-forward basis and it can invest in the system and provide the services that the city needs. And so in order to look at this next slide is a panel screenshot of a financial model that essentially takes all of our best knowledge and financial data currently and projects out the cost requirements for the stormwater utility on a go-forward basis. And so this first panel done a diagnostic scenario. What I mean by that is I've put in the O&M expenses, the personnel expenses, and the capital investment expenses, which are shown down here on the chart to the bottom left. And that shows in the 20 and 21 period, there's roughly $200 million related to those 7 neighborhoods that I just talked about a second ago. And then additionally in 2026, we're currently projecting an additional larger level of capital spending. And the way the city has proposed funding those is through a bond. The city would borrow the money and then repay it over a number of years. And so with this first scenario, we're holding the revenues flat at current levels, 2020. So you see no revenue increases going forward. Once we issue that bond, this orange bar right here, this orange line, is very much like your own personal bank account. This is the cash coming out of the fund on an annual basis. The black line is the cash coming into the fund. And as I mentioned, we've held that flat. What you see is a growing gap between the two. And what that leads to is a use of reserve balances. You can see the blue bars up here, but very quickly those go negative and have a negative trajectory. So that's an unsustainable plan to go forward. The city would not be able to afford these capital investments without a change in revenue. So this next scenario, as I switch slides, is the solved scenario in which we put in rate increases at a level that will provide just enough revenue to pay for the capital investments, the operations and maintenance of the system. And in this particular chart in the middle, again, looking at the cash in and cash out, you can see now that these two lines are very much in sync with one another over the forecast period, and that's the hallmark of sustainability. And our reserve balances now are positive and right near that minimum reserve level, as the black line demonstrates. If I move to the next section of the analysis is the cost allocation. And so what we're really concerned with here is trying to figure out how we're going to apply a yardstick, if you will, to parcels within the community to understand the benefit that they derive from stormwater services. And I've included a number of different metrics that municipalities and cities throughout Florida and throughout the United States will use to assess stormwater revenue requirements. And so in the most basic form, oftentimes we'll see taxable value. So they're paying for stormwater services out of the general fund. Now, I would argue there's not a real high relationship between the value of a parcel and how much it benefits from stormwater. But as we go down on these metrics to dwelling units, to gross area, pervious area, impervious area, these types of items are much more associated with the potential stormwater generation of a parcel and therein the benefit that they receive from the city providing stormwater services. Now, in the case of Fort Lauderdale, when we dug into the details, and this study's been ongoing since 2016, there was a real key finding that brought in another metric to the equation, and that was the fact that some of these pictures over to the right demonstrate much of the activity that's happening in Fort Lauderdale is happening in the roadway network. And so there's really dual threats, if you will. There's the precipitation events that the city needs to deal with and transfer that water and deal with the water quality of that water, but there's also tidal influences. And when there are king tides present or increasing sea level heights, that influences the stormwater system, and the city needs to plan and make investments to thwart that threat. And so for that reason, we brought into the equation trip generation rates, which we'll talk about in a second, but effectively measure how different parcels use the roadway network and how they benefit from a road network that's free, passable, and clear during precipitation events. And so what are trip generation rates? They come from an organization called the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And what they really do fundamentally, what we're using them for in this process is an ability to look at different land uses on average. And we're not going down to a specific parcel or house, but what we want to do is compare on average different land uses and how they utilize that roadway network. And so for comparison purposes, a single family home per ITE data uses the roadway network on average during the week about 9.44 times per day. A gas station, on the other hand, is about 845 trips per 1,000 square feet. So a big difference there. And a supermarket is about 106 trips per 1,000 square feet. So again, it just gives us a way to compare and measure how different land uses utilize the roadway network that is made free and passable by the activities of the stormwater department and utility. So we presented that to council and the commission, Fort Lauderdale, and what they opted for was a hybrid approach that would take into account the current fee structure that's in place right now, and I'll get into the exact description of how that works in a second, but also bring trip generation into the fee structure to come up with what would be a bifurcated system that would have two components to it that are measured for each parcel. And so the first part, when we have that discussion of having two different bases, is how much of the revenue will we recover on each basis? And in order to determine that, we performed a cost of service analysis, which looked at two of the key services provided by stormwater activities, which is quantity management and quality management. And so in order to do this, what we did is we grabbed the current year budget. We sat down with the staff that knows these cost centers the best and went through on a line item by line item basis and broke the expenditures down between quantity and quality. And you can see off to the right kind of the color denoting quantity versus quality and the lighter blue. If you look at the overall system for all expenses, it's currently split roughly 20% quality related activities, 80% quantity related activities. And so we made a tie between that percentage and the trips and the current structure, the trips being quality related. Oftentimes there's a lot of activity in those streets, again, that's occurring, not only flood management, but also quality related. There is catch basins and various things that are stopping pollutants from entering the environment. And so the next part of the analysis is the fee structure. This graphic right here, and I'll take a second to walk through it, talks about how it applies to an individual parcel. And so the first part of this up to the right is the current structure, and that's exactly what's in place right now. It's just been updated to recognize the finding that the system needs more revenue in FY21. We mentioned a 54% increase in revenue over current levels. We've then split that up 80% to the current structure, 20% to the trip structure. So I'll stay with the current structure. And when we move into the current structure, there are fundamentally three customer classes. There are single family homes, improved properties, meaning that they've got some kind of impervious area or improved development on it, and then vacant parcels. On the single family parcels, the fee for the current structure is determined by dwelling units. So the amount of dwelling units that you have on the parcel increases the fee. If you're on an improved parcel, it's done on the gross acreage or the gross size of the parcel. And the same with the vacant parcels. It's on the gross size. The fees off to the right are per dwelling unit here and per gross acre for the improved and for the vacant for the assessment in FY21. Now, if I take the trip structure, so I'm going to move over, this comes down to the blue section here. On the trip structure, we've got the additional 20% of the required revenues for the fiscal year 21. What we've done is looked at the entire number of trips taking place with all land use types accounted for within the city service area, divided out that revenue requirement. That comes to about $4.19 per trip. And then what we do is we go on a parcel by parcel basis and we look at the land use that's been assigned to that parcel by the Broward County property appraiser. There are 63 different types of trip generation rates associated with those land uses. So we look at those and then compute based on the various units that are associated with the parcel, the number of trips that they would likely generate or that they're estimated to generate. And so in a single family, that would be the 9.44 times the dwelling units. When you bring those two together, that will come up with the full assessment amount for FY21. And so what does this look like? These next few slides will show the customer impacts, and I'll go through a number of them. This one is a single family. So for a single family home with one dwelling unit, the current fee that's in place is on a monthly utility bill, oftentimes the water, sewer, and garbage services. It's $14 a month currently, $168 a year annually. The calculated updated fee is down below, so it's $21.52 if you look at it on a monthly basis to make the current comparison, or on an annual basis, it's $258.26. That's a change of $90.26, or $7.52 on a monthly basis. And again, recognizing that changing the structure, but also that the overall utility needs additional revenue to make the capital investment. So that's what's driving a lot of those increases we're seeing. If we look at other municipalities in Florida, oftentimes when we do a rate study, one of the first questions is when we get a rate out of it is how does that compare to other communities? And so this particular slide, we grab some of the fees that are charged to single family homes from some of the largest stormwater utilities in the state. The state of Florida actually has the most stormwater utilities in the nation. There's about 180 of them or so. You can see currently Fort Lauderdale is at $14. And off to the right, we can see the updated amount the 2152 monthly, which would put it on the right side of the equation as compared to a number of other communities. And I think as I show these surveys, oftentimes it's always good to always put the caveats in there too, which is, this is the fee that they're currently charging. So a couple things I'm seeing in the industry. One is these fees are under a lot of pressure to change. And the experience that we're seeing in Fort Lauderdale as a result of this study and the analysis we've conducted is not that uncommon. We're seeing a number of communities react to different challenges, emerging regulations, precipitation changes in which they need to make investments and raise the level of these fees. So I would not be surprised if we go to update this, that these fees do move in the upward direction for a number of these communities. Secondarily, when you look at the communities kind of start in the middle and go into the right that have higher fees, these are typically coastal communities. The cost of providing stormwater services when you're in Southeast Florida on the coast is different than an inland community, and it often comes at a higher cost to deal with those coastal influences. And we see many of these municipalities are in that same bucket that Fort Lauderdale's in, dealing with those coastal pressures. If I move to a different type of customer, this is a condo example. With regards to condominiums, since the bill is currently on the utility bill, it's a monthly bill, oftentimes that bill is coming as one bill to the entire condominium. I've grabbed an example here of kind of mid-rise, an in-between a horizontally spread out condo complex and a very vertical one, trying to grab an example parcel here. The change that I'll talk about in a second, though, would have this bill actually go to the property owners, the condo owners. And currently, if we look at the monthly per unit charge for these, it's about $3.55. That would be increasing up to $6.31. It's $2.76% increase, a larger percentage increase. For 42, the current fee is $42.55 annually. $75.76 would be the update, or a change of $33.21 per unit. Now, with regards to other examples, this is an institutional example. So this is a church, and in this example, their current bill is $1,428.71. The calculated fee would be $25.26.32. That's a change of about $1,097.61. My final example is a commercial example. And in this particular example, it's a supermarket, pretty large. And as we talked about with this new bifurcated fee structure, one of the elements is trip generation. And on this particular type of an example, they have a really high trip generation rate. There's a lot of benefit from having free and passable streets to this parcel. And so what we see is in this one, it's $32.08.30 currently. The calculated is $22,584.60. That's a change of $19,376.31. And again, I put down here kind of a slider that shows what percentage of that fee is trip generation for this parcel. It's a larger percentage on this particular example. Additional comment with these property examples I'm showing right now, these are shown at the gross assessment level. With a tax bill, if it's paid typically on time or early, there is a 4% discount on the taxes that are levied. And so just a thought as I present those examples to take into consideration. And then the final item I'll be talking about is the collection method. I mentioned several times it's on the utility bill right now, coming monthly to most customers throughout the community. The recommendation, though, as part of the study is to move it to a non-ad valorem assessment. The non-ad valorem assessment has a number of benefits that help when collecting stormwater revenue requirements. And typically the ones that we've highlighted in Fort Lauderdale's case is greater accuracy. It really makes it much more accurate for the city to be able to directly bill parcel owners for stormwater services as opposed to going through the utility bill and depending on the existing relationship of water utility accounts to stormwater parcels. Additionally, typically higher collection rates, which benefits everyone overall if everyone's paying into the system. This will effectively work in a transition period. So it's currently on the utility bill. Beginning in mid-October, if approved by the commission, the utility bills would begin to phase out for the current charges for the current fiscal year. And then in November, there would be a non-ad valorem assessment, a one-time charge for all stormwater services for each parcel for the next year, for the next fiscal year for the city. Now, with regards to other communities, just a quick survey about the collection methodology. There are two different ones being deployed, as I mentioned, utility billing and non-ad valorem assessment. What we see with the largest utilities in the state is really a split right down the middle. We've got about a 50-50, 50% on the utility bill, 50% on the assessment. But I will say we are seeing a good portion of communities every year that goes by switch over to the assessment methodology. to recognize and gain some of the benefits we just talked through with regards to those non-ad valorem assessments for stormwater. As part of the project, we've additionally worked with the city to put up a stormwater assessment viewer on the city's website. What this does is it allows any parcel owner to go to their exact parcel. If they click on it, a box will pop up, and the exact parameters that have been measured and inputted into the assessment that come from the Broward County Property Assessment Assessor's Office will be shown, as well as the annual assessment for FY21. I've put a link down here at the bottom, the link on the final slide here as I transition back over to Jason for any questions. Additionally, we'll take you to the landing page for Stormwater, which will allow you to get access to that GIS viewer. So Jason, turn it back over to you for any questions.
Thank you, Kyle. For anyone who may have joined late, you can submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll jump right into the questions. So the first question, Kyle, is how is the fee amount calculated?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back real quick to a slide I talked over a second ago, as I mentioned that, but it's fundamentally for FY21 a change in the calculation methodology. We're using a bifurcated structure that looks at continuing the current structure, which has 3 customer classes: single family, improved, vacant, charge dwelling units for single family, on gross acreage for improved and vacant. And then the big addition for FY21 is a consideration of trip generation for every parcel within the city service area, which tries to recognize the benefits, those free and passable streets, as well as the quality activities taking place on the street. So it's really 2 assessments that fold into one for FY21.
Perfect, thank you. The next question I believe Diane is going to take, it is, what is an assessment? How does it differ from a tax? And do the people have a vote for or against this assessment?
So then an assessment is a fee, and it's not based on the value of your property. So it is just going to be a stormwater fee, and it's not a tax. And the people aren't voting for this. This will be brought to the commission beginning tomorrow night, and actually on the 14th, it will be brought to commission for a vote.
Perfect. And they're going to hold a public hearing before that vote, correct?
That is when the public hearing is, on Monday the 14th.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane. The next question, Kyle, is how does this affect coastal multifamily apartment rentals?
Yeah, absolutely. So apartments will be looked at in the assessment on the number of dwelling units that are there that were recorded in the property appraiser's data, and a trip generation assigned to that, as well as the gross size of the underlying parcel. And so those 2 components together will determine kind of the measured units that would then size the assessment for each one individually. And those fees will differ because each apartment complex is going to be a little bit of a different size and have different development characteristics. So the assessment is going to size to the unique characteristics present on the parcel.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. All right, our next question for Kyle is how can the type of house determine trips generated without accounting for the number of people within the household?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the real fundamental answer is, that level of granularity doesn't really exist in a readily available data set. And so what ITE does is uses an observational analysis to look at the number of trips typically generated from a single family house or any other land use, and gives us a readily accessible, widely used database that we can use for an assessment like this, where we're comparing different utilizations of roadway use.
Perfect, thank you. All right, we have a request to review the slide indicating the revenue needed to do the projects.
I believe that one, we're talking about this one, I think, which is the financial analysis and projections going out in a 10-year forecast. And so as I indicated in FY21, after putting the capital projects in, which for 20 and 21 total roughly $200 million, issuing a bond, this revenue increase in 2021 is sized to meet the ongoing needs of the utility that would then in 21 start to include the repayment, principal and interest of that debt that was floated in order to make the capital investments. Then going out in the future, just real quickly, put some inflationary rate increases. And I will mention at this point in time that These is a projection of increases once we go outside of fiscal year 21 that the commission would need to set on an annual basis. That exact change to the assessment. But then what we have projected in 2026, the utility were to, at that point in time, make another large capital investment with a bond, the fees would then need to increase again in order to ensure we have enough revenue to repay that debt and have coverage on it.
Perfect, thank you. And I do also want to mention that the slides after the meeting can be found on the city website at www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. The next question is, are government structures exempt from assessment?
In the Fort Lauderdale utility assessment that is proposed, they are.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is, I'm looking at my utility bill right now and I see descriptions, 8 descriptions showing. Which one of those descriptions pertains to the stormwater? Is Veronica on the call? Do not believe she joined us. So the answer to that question is...
Susan Grant is here.
Oh, thank you, Susan.
Yeah, if it's on a single family home, I think it's $14 and it would be identified on the bill as stormwater.
Perfect, thank you. All right, the next question is, how does the proposed assessment methodology compare to communities similar to Fort Lauderdale?
Yeah, absolutely. So each community goes through a very similar process as Fort Lauderdale, where they do a master plan that identifies the hydrological needs of the community, the level of service that needs to be provided with regards to stormwater, and then additionally, a rate study, much like the results that I presented today are done for a community, to understand how to tailor the revenue requirements and what we need to run the system with the underlying parcel characteristics. And so in the case of Fort Lauderdale, as I mentioned, there's some uniqueness here in being coastal and the fact that a lot of stormwater services are happening in the street network. And for that reason, the fee that's being proposed as part of the assessment in 2021 is a little bit unique in the fact that it incorporates into it the trip generation rates and the benefits received from that roadway network activity. The other part of the fee, though, that's related to effectively the impervious area on a parcel, it's very commonly used throughout the industry. And so these types of fees, as I mentioned, broadly speaking, are very, very common, though. There's over 180 utilities that have fees within the state.
Perfect, thank you, Kyle. The next question is, how many total dwelling units are there that will be assessed?
So I'd have to grab the exact number. I wouldn't want to misspeak. I know with regards to parcels, there's over 80,000 parcels within the city that will receive an assessment. Jason, we could probably find that number and maybe follow up afterwards with that.
Perfect. 1 second. All right, the next question states, trips generated is a grossly unfair methodology. What adjustment made for seniors who would not be making as many trips? The retirees are unduly burdened. Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I think the best way I can answer that is that the way that we're using trips here is not down to that individual level that's described. We're really trying to use this to compare broad customer classifications. Think about single family, multifamily, higher rises, higher development, vertical development within the community, and understanding how those broader categories, there's roughly 63 of them that are in use within the community, those land uses, benefit from the street network. And it is a pretty good metric out there in the industry to be able to differentiate those benefits at that level. Perfect, thank you. All right, we will give it just another minute. That looks like all the questions we have thus far. All right, next question is, City of Fort Lauderdale supplies water to unincorporated areas in Broward. Are all homes that use the city's water services assessed the fee?
So what we're talking about today is stormwater, which is a bit different than the water system. So the city does operate a municipal water system. It does provide water to communities and homes outside of its boundaries. What we're really talking about today, though, is the stormwater, which is mainly the management of precipitation or tidal type events. And that is really confined, and this assessment is confined to the municipal boundaries of the city.
Perfect, thank you. Is there any way to use the square footage of a house?
Not within the current assessment that's being proposed. So what's being proposed right now, and the reason it's dwelling units is that is was the current structure that's in place, but it's also an easily found metric within the property appraiser to be able to scale that assessment to account for larger increases or larger properties. And so that's typically a metric that's used pretty widely.
Perfect, thank you. All right, that is all the questions we have thus far. We'll give it another minute here. Perfect. When will this be before commission to allow for opposition? And the answer to that question is on September 14th. The commission will be voting on this one last time, and they will be holding a public hearing.
And Jason, I just wanted to chime in that the time of that hearing is 5:01 p.m. on September 14th.
And Shannon, that will be a public meeting. That'll be in City Hall.
It's going to be a virtual meeting, so people can participate similar to the way they've joined this meeting today.
Perfect.
They will
Thank
be
you.
able to submit questions in advance via the city website, and we can post that information on that stormwater page that you referenced earlier.
Perfect. Okay, we'll give it one more minute. Those are all the questions we have thus far. Next question is, can we get a copy of the presentation? After the meeting, once the presentation becomes available, it will be posted to www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. Okay, it looks like all the questions have been addressed at this time. We want to thank you for participating in this evening's meeting. Please feel free to log on to www.fortlauderdale.gov. Oh, we got one more question there. Can you tell us how far in advance we need to request for commissioners' meeting? Shannon, do you know the answer to that question? How far in advance are they able to sign up to speak during the meeting?
I believe it's right up until the meeting starts. I'll go ahead and give my email address out loud here during the meeting. If you would please send me either your email or a phone number, I'll follow up afterwards. My email is svezina@fortlauderdale.gov. That's SVEZINA at fortlauderdale.gov.
Perfect. Thank you, Shannon. All right, just give it one more second here. Shannon, my Q&A portion is frozen. It's not responding. Are you seeing any additional questions?
I do see a question that says, will the answers to the questions be typed? We will post a recording of this meeting on the city website. We also have a Q&A currently posted on the city website that has about 19 different questions and answers readily available. We also have copies of this PowerPoint presentation posted on the city website. And again, that address, in case anyone wanted to follow up and review that, is www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater, all one word. And if you received any emails today or over the last couple of days via Twitter or Facebook or Nextdoor or Constant Contact, you can click on the links in there to access recordings of meetings, FAQs, and meeting presentations, as well as contact information to follow up if you have any additional questions.
Shannon, I'm still frozen over here if there's additional questions.
I do not see any additional questions. I think we can go ahead and conclude this meeting. For anyone who has any additional questions or wanted to participate, there is going to be one final meeting on September 8th And then, as I mentioned, there is contact information in the event that you have questions prior to the next meeting, and that's on the city website at fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. And thank you, everybody, very much for joining and spending your time with us tonight.
Yeah.